What's up guys, Houndish here, and today we're jumping in with a little bit of Destiny 2 news, and specifically in this video we're going to be focusing on 2 new interviews with Bungie. And of course, following the showcase we had earlier in August, we're getting some additional bits of media coverage, and we've got some interviews from Games Radar as well as PC Gamer, which don't necessarily reveal any absolutely massive new details about the expansions, but do give us some insight into how Bungie are thinking about the game, as well as a couple of additional details that may answer some questions we have about how some of the systems will work moving forward, including stuff about Grapple, how that ability is going to be paired with the grenade slot for Strand. They also talk about a future Reprise raid in 2023, their ambitions to change the power leveling systems in the game, Playist updates, a final major story piece for Calus, plus some other tidbits about customization, Fragments aspects, and more. And so guys, I hope you enjoyed the video today. Of course, full credit to the original interviews, and those are linked down below in full. But without further delay, let's get into it. Firstly, let's talk about some of the conversation from the new Games Radar interview. And Austin Wood from Games Radar speaks to Joe Blackburn and Dan McAuliffe from Bungie. And he points out initially that there's an interesting contrast between Calus, the co-villain of Lightfall, and Aramis, the big bad guy of the current season and Beyond Light expansion. For years, virtually every Destiny villain was a lot like Aramis, someone who existed solely to drive his short plot to a finish line. And it's definitely been true. We've battled it out with many different enemies. Some of them we've defeated in one form or another. And then of course there have been others that we haven't really heard about for a long period of time. And he goes on to say that Joe Blackburn says Bungie's been planning a big role for Calus for years, and by finally returning to Calus in a big way, Bungie hopes to pay off one of Destiny 2's earliest story commitments. And so on the subject of Calus, Joe Blackburn said, "We don't want to keep the doors open forever. We don't want to leave you hanging, and we eventually want to make good on that promise. And Calus was really one of the first long-term promises that we made. So in Lightfall, we want to go with this big blockbuster action fantasy. When that comes up, and when we start to look at the narrative roadmap, we say, okay, what's going to help us here? We've got the Witness, and the Witness has this specific stoic personality. So we need a big, boisterous villain as well, which makes this the Calus release. This is when we're going to have him, and they really foil each other well." And so that kind of suggests that in a way, the story here could be equally or more about Calus than it is the Witness, which when you think about the Final Shape expansion that'll follow Lightfall, the title sort of makes sense and it opens up a lot of possibilities in this storytelling across the next couple of years. Nonetheless, interesting to get a better idea of how Bungie look at the Calus character. Next though, they speak about grappling and Strand. And an interesting detail here, Austin Wood points out that the Strand grappling hook sits in the grenade slot and is identical across all classes, but Joe Blackburn teased that aspects and fragments will be able to alter it. Joe Blackburn does highlight that the Strand grapple is a tool to move the player and not a tool to move enemies, and also adds that the base cooldown of the grappling hook won't allow for non-stop Spider-Man style swinging, and so much like any other grenade, it has a cooldown and we won't be able to continuously use it. But for the new location near Muna specifically, Bungie have gone ahead and actually placed Strand grapple points. So on the new location, there'll be points that instantly reset the grapple cooldown in order to enable exploration. And then otherwise, in general, it will behave much like a grenade. And Joe Blackburn adds that because it's in the grenade slot, we made sure there are some offensive capabilities with Grapple. If you're the kind of person who wants to grapple in, there's a finisher on Grapple that you can do. You could also grapple to a target and then pull out your shotgun. And he adds that some Guardians are going to use this as an escape, others are going to use it to be aggressive. What is that going to mean, and why would you take Grapple over a different Strand grenade? Obviously cool to get a better idea of the sandbox possibilities, things like grappling immediately into a finisher, but also that point that you could actually opt to use a different Strand grenade, and presumably in that case you wouldn't have Grapple at your disposal immediately. And so there is definitely going to be some decision making around Grapple, and the various options and ways that there are to set Strand up. I need to go back and look at the showcase. I'm honestly not sure how much of this was immediately obvious in the showcase, but some of these additional details are definitely interesting. They also talk about whether Grapple could break the game, and the devs say they're always worrying about the potential for breaking the game, especially when you add something as ambitious as a new movement ability, and one that we intend to extend across the entire game. Dan McAuliffe says, "I have a lot of faith in our team's ability to test and vet that kind of thing, but I'm probably most nervous and even excited to see what kind of utility it has in PvP. As with everything else that's introduced, it'll bring a change to the sandbox that we'll react to." And they had spoken in the PC Gamer interview about the kind of trade-off between bringing something exciting into the sandbox and the fact that to some extent it is going to break the game, right? It's pretty much guaranteed in places. And the developers say essentially, on the most part, they think that that is going to be worth it. They also add that they want to be careful that Strand and Grapple specifically doesn't feel like something that is necessary for all players to have. And they talk about striking the balance between making it a strong tool and equally not making Guardians feel a lot less powerful when they switch back to the other classes. There's also an interesting section where they touch on the content vaulting aspect, which for the moment Bungie have said that sunsetting isn't going to happen in the next couple of years. So they're not planning to cut any locations, Nessus won't be removed or anything like that. But they say importantly, they want players to be able to access all of the content in the kind of Light and Darkness saga at the moment. And at least up until the final shape has been released, they want to ensure that all of the expansions in that saga and the base content in the game remains available so that players can kind of experience it in full. Obviously, beyond that, we are likely to see some changes because, as Bungie have pointed out, they can't indefinitely grow the game. But it's interesting that they've got to a point where they don't necessarily have to cut any content for the next couple of years. They also talk about accessing new content and new players coming on board. And Joe Blackburn says we're not going to ask players to play 400 hours of old content to be able to join their friends. And he says the most challenging thing we've got to start making headway in is that we have a ton of narrative in Destiny and it feels really daunting. All of my friends know all of this stuff about these characters and I don't. But it points out what is not the solution is to say go back and play 100 hours, 200 hours of Destiny. And what we want to be looking at in the future is how to offer ways to get the exact information you need. And it's going to take a big lift from Bungie, but it's definitely on their radar. If we can get you into the systems, we've got to get you into the story. And we've seen small elements of how Bungie want to kind of tackle this. For instance, the new trailer that they played in the showcase, which is the kind of introduction to Destiny. They're looking at kind of concise ways of summarizing the universe up until now. So obviously that will factor into that new Light onboarding experience. And then the other element is Guardian ranks. And they say the primary question that Guardian ranks answer for new players is what should I be doing in the game? And obviously having that in the director is really important. It's going to help players understand how all of these different systems work together, but it will also push players into more difficult content. And he also adds that from rank 4 to 5, there'll be stuff focused on demonstrating how different guns work. There'll be elements that show off builds in Destiny, playing through different activities like Lost Sectors, Campaign, and laddering up to more difficult stuff like Nightfall activities, and beyond that, possibly a dungeon, and then other more difficult content. So the good thing is that it will create more kind of stepping stones, I guess, for players, as well as a more understandable roadmap of what content really matters in Destiny, right? And they point out how Guardian ranks will tie directly into the LFG tool that they're working on. And they say every LFG tool that we've seen that's failed has not been able to deliver the promise of, do I know this person is ready for this activity? And that's part of what they want Guardian ranks to do. And according to Austin Wood, he also went on to say that Bungie hopes and not necessarily plans to add LFG with the release of the next reprised raid from Destiny 1, which should be dropping sometime in mid-2023. Of course, Bungie had already outlined that the LFG feature would come in the year of Lightfall. And so all being well, we're going to see it in one of those summer releases. But another thing is mention of another reprised raid from D1, which of course means we're looking at 2 raids now, right? Crota's End and Wrath of the Machine as potential candidates to return in 2023. And honestly, I think it's entirely possible that Bungie could bring back either of those raids. And with some of the mechanical changes that they've made in the other reprise raids so far, there's certainly scope to improve on Crota's End in terms of the kind of difficulty, the mechanics element, potentially even expand on it. Although I would be equally excited, if not more excited, to see Wrath of the Machine back. And considering there were originally Splicer enemies in that raid, plus it was located in the Plaguelands, if we were to see that back, of course, it means some interesting possibilities for more elements than just the raid. Although we shouldn't necessarily speculate for now, the good news is another reprise raid is coming mid-2023. And if we're lucky, that LFG feature could go live around the same time. The devs add that they are supremely confident LFG will be ready before the final shape. And part of the plan is to get that feature into the game before the expansion to iron out some of the kinks. Who knows, perhaps we'll even get it in a kind of beta format or something like that. Another interesting bit here, they speak about the power leveling system in Destiny. And Joe Blackburn affirmed that Bungie are still looking to make big changes to that leveling system. However, what they may look like and when they'll arrive is unclear. He said specifically that they'd still like to make major changes to the power system. We looked at things like crafting as a scary thing to add to Destiny, and power is that times 10. There's some good stuff that Power does for the game, and there's some really bad stuff that Power is doing to Destiny right now. I think what you're going to see is us do some experiments that are helping us understand if we're making the right long-term plays for Power and helping us dial that in. If we're going to do this overhaul, can we have some good data before we get there? And I think seeing systems like Guardian ranks come online, as well as stuff like crafting, titles, and seasonal challenges, if we make big system changes to the game, do we still have the progression that we need? And is there still stuff for players to do? Is there still a guide? So yeah, expect some weird experiments to be flying through in the year of Lightfall. And so really what he's saying there is that Bungie are trying to build out progression in Destiny in ways that are more expansive than power level in a lot of respects, right? And they've definitely done that to an extent with seasonal challenges, even more so with titles, gilding. And to an extent, he's saying that they want to prove that Destiny has valuable progression outside of power level. Certainly interesting that in the interview they lean more towards almost the idea of power level not even existing as opposed to it being revamped. Of course though, for the moment this is really an idea, but it's possible that major change could happen in a couple years' time. Lots of interesting stuff right there in the Games Radar interview. An interesting section from the PC Gamer interview though touches on Playist stuff. And Tim Clark from PC Gamer mentioned to the devs the lack of updates for Vanguard Strikes, Crucible, and Gambit playlists. And Blackburn had said that we have a team looking at a bunch of these problems. We're happy with the work that they've done this year, things like adding Battlegrounds to those playlists, but we're going to be doing a bunch of work specifically in the Vanguard playlist around Lightfall. We're going back to some strikes to update them. And Dan from Bungie adds that they don't think every strike needs to be replaced, but the team wants to go into older ones and give them the same attention that newer content gets. So potentially another round of updates to strike stuff there. I think a great opportunity for strikes right now would be strike-specific loot, just like we had in D1. Of course, we still have that in a way, in the form of Nightfall drops, but especially with the crafting system we have now, if Bungie were to introduce some absolutely bonkers legendary weapons that you could get from specific strikes that were themed around enemies and stuff, were also craftable and had some unique kind of sandbox capabilities, I think there's a ton of possibility in the reward side as well as the gameplay side when it comes to strikes. But give us your thoughts down below. And also share any thoughts you have on the rest of the stuff we've spoken about from the interviews today. Quite a bit of interesting discussion. And so I hope the video has been enjoyable, guys. If it has, a rating down below really does help us out on the channel. Plus, feel free to get subscribed and I'll keep you posted with more Destiny content. And otherwise for today, I appreciate you all tuning in, and I'll catch you very soon.